The final image I have of her, before everything changed, is of her laughing across a dinner table at a restaurant that was too loud and too expensive. She was wearing a new dress, one I knew we couldn't really afford, but her happiness was a currency I was always willing to overspend. I saw the way other men looked at her, and a part of me, the foolish, devoted part, felt a surge of pride. That pride, I would soon learn, was the anchor tied to my ankles, pulling me down into the cold, dark quiet of the truth. She left me because she believed my life, our life, was a stepping stone, and she had found a shinier, more promising one. She never imagined that the stone she was standing on was, in fact, the entire mountain. It's a hard lesson to learn when you're already in freefall. My name is Mark. I'm 42 years old, and I'm an architect. Not a celebrity architect who designs gleaming, impossible towers that scrape the sky, but the kind who builds things that last. Community centers, libraries, solid family homes with good foundations. I find a quiet satisfaction in structure, in blueprints, in the methodical process of turning an idea into a physical reality that can withstand storms. My life was built on the same principles: stability, integrity, and a belief that if you put in the honest work, the structure will hold. For 12 years, that structure was my marriage to Clara. But let me start from the beginning. Our life together was, by my estimation, a good one. We had a comfortable home in a quiet suburb, a house I had designed myself, with big windows that let in the morning light. I ran a small but respected firm, one I had built from the ground up over 15 years. The work was demanding, the hours were long, but it was my passion. I believed it was our shared future I was building. Every late night at the drafting table, every weekend spent reviewing structural reports, was an investment in the life I thought we both wanted. A life of quiet comfort, mutual respect, and shared dreams. Clara worked part-time in art gallery curation, a job that was more about social standing than income. She was beautiful, charming, and possessed a social grace that I, in my quiet and focused world, lacked. She was the one who remembered birthdays, who organized dinner parties, who made our house a home filled with laughter and friends. Or so I thought. Looking back, I see that the laughter was often at the expense of others, and the friends were more like an audience for her performance of the perfect life. The first hairline cracks in our foundation began to appear subtly. They were small comments, dropped into conversation like casual observations. "Did you see the new car Julian bought his wife? It's stunning," or "Eleanor was telling me about their trip to Tuscany." Can you imagine? Eleanor was her mother, a woman who measured a man's worth by the carat of the diamonds he could afford and the exclusivity of the vacations he could provide. Julian was the husband of one of her friends, a flashy real estate developer who dealt in high-risk, high-reward projects. He was everything I was not: loud, extravagant, and dripping with the kind of wealth that announced itself. I would usually respond with something practical and, in hindsight, deeply unsatisfying to her. "We're saving for the firm's expansion, honey. That's our future, or maybe next year we can plan a big trip. Things are a little tight right now." To me, these were responsible statements. To her, I now realize they were admissions of failure. She didn't want a future built on solid, slow-growing equity. She wanted the instant gratification of a luxury high-rise. Her dissatisfaction grew from a low hum to a persistent buzz. She started spending more time with her gallery friends, a circle that revolved around Julian and his wife. The dinners I came home to became less frequent. Our conversations became transactional, focused on bills and schedules rather than our lives. I attributed it to stress, to the natural ebb and flow of a long-term relationship. I told myself to work harder, to secure the next big contract, to finally give her the effortless luxury she seemed to crave. I was a fool trying to patch a structural flaw with a new coat of paint. The inciting incident, the moment the entire facade crumbled, was not a dramatic explosion. It was a quiet click, the sound of a phone being hung up too quickly. I had come home early from a site inspection, a rare occurrence. The house was quiet. I walked into the kitchen to get a glass of water and heard her voice from the sunroom, low and conspiratorial. I paused, not wanting to interrupt, but the words that drifted through the open door froze me in place. No, he has no idea, she was saying, a little laugh in her voice. He's so buried in his boring blueprints, he wouldn't notice if the house was on fire. He thinks I'm at a gallery meeting. A pause. Julian, you have to be patient. I can't just walk out. There are assets. I'm entitled to half of his firm, you know. He's been building it for years. That's our real future. Not this pathetic little life. Each word was a precise, calculated blow. My firm. Our future. The sheer, transactional coldness of it hollowed me out. The man on the other end of the line, Julian, was not just some abstract symbol of wealth anymore. He was a concrete plan. I was not a husband. I was an asset to be liquidated. I heard her say a hurried goodbye, the click of the phone echoing in the silent house. I backed away from the doorway, my heart pounding a slow, heavy rhythm against my ribs. I retreated to my study, the one room in the house that felt entirely mine, and closed the door. I sat in my leather chair, the scent of old paper and drafting ink surrounding me, and I felt the floor of my world give way. There was no rage. There was no screaming torrent of grief. There was only a sudden, terrifying, and absolute clarity. The structure was compromised beyond repair. The only thing to do now was to manage the demolition. I didn't confront her when she came out of the sunroom, humming a cheerful tune. She poked her head into my study. "Oh, you're home early," she said, her smile bright and utterly false. "Just got back," I said, keeping my voice even, my eyes on a blueprint I wasn't seeing. "Long day. I'm heading out to meet Catherine for a drink," she lied, effortlessly. "Don't wait up," I nodded, listening to the sound of her heels clicking on the hardwood floor, the jingle of her keys, the final, soft thud of the front door closing. She was going to meet him, the man she was planning to build a future with using the pieces of mine. In that moment of profound betrayal, something inside me shifted. The hurt was a deep, physical ache, but it was being rapidly encased in ice. The architect, the planner, the man who believed in methodical, logical progression, took over. Emotion was a liability. This was now a problem of engineering. The first thing I did was call Marcus. He wasn't just my lawyer. He was my oldest friend. We had known each other since college, and he was one of the few people who understood my quiet nature. He was sharp, pragmatic, and loyal to a fault. He answered on the second ring. "Mark, everything all right? You never call this late." I took a breath, the words feeling foreign and heavy in my mouth. "Clara is having an affair. She's planning to leave me. She thinks she's going to take half of my firm." There was a pause on the other end of the line, not of shock, but of calculation. "Okay," Marcus said, his voice calm and steady, a beacon in the storm that had just broken over my life. "First thing, did you confront her?" "No," I said. "Good. Do not confront her. Do not change your behavior in any way. Go to work tomorrow. Kiss her good morning. Be the man you were yesterday. She cannot know that you know. Am I clear?" "Clear," I repeated. The instruction was a relief. It gave me a blueprint. "Second," he continued, "we start gathering information. Quietly. I want you to go through every financial statement you can get your hands on. Joint accounts, credit cards, everything. Look for anything unusual. Hotel bills, expensive gifts, cash withdrawals. Document it. Scan it. Send it to me." "Okay," I said. My mind was already working, picturing the file cabinet in the office, the online banking portals. "Mark," Marcus said, his tone softening for just a moment. "I'm sorry. I really am. But you need to listen to me very carefully. The man you were this morning, the loving husband, he's on leave. Right now, you need to be a client. My client. And my client needs to be smart, patient, and methodical. We are going to build a fortress, brick by brick, and she is not going to see the walls going up until she's on the outside of them. Can you do that?" The question hung in the air. Could I live a lie? Could I sit across the dinner table from the woman I had loved, knowing she was actively plotting my financial ruin? Could I smile and nod while my entire world was being dismantled? The pain was still there, a raw wound. But the architect in me saw the logic in Marcus's plan. It was a structural problem, and I knew how to deal with those. Yes, I said, my voice colder and harder than I had ever heard it. I can do that. That night began the longest and most difficult phase of my life. I became an actor in my own home. I slept in our bed, the space between us a chasm of unspoken truths. I made coffee in the morning. I asked about her day. Each normal act felt like a calculated move in a game I had never wanted to play. Her obliviousness was my greatest asset. She saw my quietness as my usual preoccupation with work, my fatigue as a sign of my dedication to the firm she planned to gut. She grossly, fatally underestimated me. She saw a simple builder. She failed to see the architect of her own downfall. My first move was to follow Marcus's advice. That weekend, while Clara was out on a supposed shopping trip with her mother, I went into our home office. I had always handled our finances. She found it boring, a tedious detail of the life she was happy to enjoy but not to manage. It was an oversight that would cost her everything. I pulled years of bank statements, credit card bills, and investment reports. I laid them out on the large drafting table where I normally sketched buildings, the clean white surface now a canvas of our life's financial history. It didn't take long to find the anomalies. A recurring charge for a high-end gym I knew she didn't attend. It was near Julian's office. A series of expensive dinners at restaurants we had never been to together. Then I found it. A secondary credit card, linked to our main account, that I had completely forgotten about. It was one I had given her years ago for emergencies. The statement was a roadmap of her affair. Boutique hotels in the next town over, charges for men's clothing from a designer store, a jeweler's bill for a pair of cufflinks that cost more than our first car. I felt a cold fury settle in my stomach. It wasn't just the infidelity. It was the brazenness of it. She was using my money, the money I earned during those long nights at the office, to finance her new life with another man. I methodically scanned every single page. I created a spreadsheet cross-referencing dates and times with her stated whereabouts. The gallery meetings, the girls' nights out, the shopping trips, they all lined up perfectly with the trail of receipts. It was a meticulous, damning record of her deceit. I sent the encrypted file to Marcus with a simple subject line. Phase 1, the next step was protecting my firm. This was the part that hurt the most. My company, Markwell Designs, was more than a business to me. It was the culmination of my life's work, a testament to my belief in creating things of substance and value. I had poured my soul into it. The thought of her handing half of it over to a man like Julian was unbearable. I met Marcus at his office the following Monday. He had the files I'd sent spread across his conference table. "This is good, Mark," he said, his tone all business. "This is more than just infidelity. This is dissipation of marital assets. A judge will not look kindly on this. What about the firm?" I asked, cutting to the heart of the matter. "You started it before you were married, which is a major point in our favor," he explained. "But its increase in value during the marriage is considered marital property. That's the piece she's after. We need to insulate it." Now, over the next few weeks, we worked quietly and quickly. Marcus brought in a forensic accountant and a corporate restructuring specialist. We executed a plan I had been considering for years but had never acted on. I converted Markwell Designs from a sole proprietorship into a more complex corporate structure. We created a new parent company, one funded by my premarital savings and a carefully structured business loan secured against future, not current, contracts. My ownership stake was diluted into different classes of shares, legally separating the firm's value from my personal marital assets. It was a clean, legal, and entirely defensible strategy. To an outsider, it would look like a standard business evolution. To Clara and her future lawyer, it would be a fortress wall they hadn't even seen being built. Living the lie was the hardest part. Clara was more cheerful than she had been in years. She was buoyant with the secret of her impending departure, believing she was playing me for a fool. She would kiss me goodbye in the morning, her lips still tasting of the coffee I'd made, and I would have to fight the urge to recoil. She would ask me about a big project I was competing for, a new community library. "How's the library proposal going?" she'd ask. feigning interest over dinner. That would be a huge win for the firm, wouldn't it? It would be, I'd say, my voice a carefully constructed monotone. A lot of work. I could see the calculation in her eyes. A bigger firm meant a bigger payout. She was cheering for the horse she was planning to sell for glue. The dramatic irony was a bitter pill I swallowed every single day. I found myself retreating further into my work, which only reinforced her narrative of me as the boring, emotionally distant husband she was justified in leaving. One evening, her mother, Eleanor, came for dinner. She was a woman who spoke in thinly veiled criticisms and brand names. Throughout the meal, she sang Julian's praises. "Julian just closed on that waterfront deal," she announced to the table. "Clara tells me his new house is simply divine. It's so wonderful to see her surrounded by people who appreciate the finer things." I just nodded and ate my food, a quiet observer at my own execution. Clara shot me a look, a mixture of pity and impatience. She thought I was oblivious. She had no idea I was taking notes. The day finally came about 2 months after I overheard the phone call. I came home to find her sitting in the living room, her posture rigid. She had rehearsed this. "Mark, we need to talk," she began, the classic opening line. I sat down opposite her, bracing myself. "I haven't been happy for a long time," she said, her voice filled with a practiced sorrow. "I feel like we've grown apart. You're always at work, and I need more. I need to find myself again." It was a masterclass in blame-shifting and vague platitudes. She never mentioned Julian. She painted herself as a victim of a stale marriage, a woman on a noble quest for self-discovery. "I think we should separate," she concluded, looking at me as if she expected an argument, a plea. I just looked at her for a long moment. Then I gave her the one response she was not prepared for. "Okay." The single word threw her off balance. "Okay? That's all you have to say." "What do you want me to say, Clara?" I asked, my voice calm. "If you're not happy, you're not happy." I'm not going to beg. Her confusion quickly morphed into indignation. My quiet acceptance wasn't part of her script. She had expected a fight, which would have validated her decision, framing me as controlling and difficult. My simple, logical acquiescence unnerved her. "Well," she said, recovering, "I'll be staying with my mother for a while. We'll have to sort things out. With lawyers." "I understand," I said. "I'll have my lawyer contact yours." She left that night. As I watched her car pull out of the driveway, I didn't feel the gut-wrenching sadness I had anticipated. I felt a profound, chilling sense of relief. The performance was over. The strategic phase could now begin in earnest. A week later, the first letter from her lawyer arrived. It was exactly what Marcus and I had predicted. It was a document filled with aggressive, baseless demands. She wanted the house. She wanted lifelong alimony. And, as expected, she demanded 50% of the value of Markwell Designs. Her lawyer, clearly fed a narrative of my vast liquid wealth, had valued the firm at an absurdly inflated number. They were coming for the kill. Marcus read the letter in his office and laughed. "This is perfect," he said. "They're arrogant. They're overreaching. They've shown their entire hand in the first move." Our response was simple, calm, and factual. We agreed to a standard valuation of the firm by a neutral third party. We proposed selling the house and splitting the equity, as is standard. We offered a reasonable, short-term alimony package based on her earning potential, not her desired lifestyle. We made no mention of the affair or the financial misconduct. We were setting the trap, baiting it with reason and professionalism. Clara, meanwhile, was living her new life loudly. Her social media was a curated gallery of her happiness. Photos of her and Julian on his yacht. Dinners at exclusive restaurants. Weekends in Aspen. She was wearing new clothes, new jewelry. She was building a public narrative that she had upgraded, leaving her drab, small life behind for one of excitement and luxury. Every post was another piece of evidence for our file, another brick in the wall she couldn't see. Her lawyer's response to our offer was dismissive. They rejected our terms outright and demanded we go to mediation. They were confident. They believed my calm response was a sign of weakness, that I was a simple man out of his depth who would eventually cave to their pressure. The first mediation session was held in a sterile conference room with a large mahogany table that felt like a battlefield. Clara sat opposite me, flanked by her smug, expensive-looking lawyer. She wouldn't meet my eye. She projected an air of bored superiority, as if this were all a tedious formality before she could collect her winnings. The session began with her lawyer outlining their demands again, his voice oozing with condescension. He spoke of Clara's emotional and domestic contributions to my success, painting a picture of a devoted wife who had sacrificed her own ambitions for my career. I listened without expression. When he was finished, the mediator turned to us. "Mr. Markwell, your response." Marcus spoke for me. His voice was the antithesis of his counterparts, calm, measured, and devoid of emotion. "We believe Mr. Harris's valuation of the firm is speculative and inaccurate," he began. "And we have some concerns about the dissipation of marital assets that occurred in the months leading up to the separation." Clara's lawyer scoffed. "A baseless accusation, is it?" Marcus asked quietly. He slid a single, thin folder across the table. "This is the statement for a secondary credit card in your client's name, linked to their joint account. Perhaps you could ask your client to explain the $2,000 charge at the Grandview Boutique Hotel on May 14th, or the $700 charge for men's cufflinks at Rossi's on May 20th. My client," he said, gesturing to me, "was out of town at a conference on both of those dates, and he does not wear cufflinks." I watched Clara's face. The bored superiority vanished, replaced by a flicker of panic. Her eyes darted from the folder to her lawyer, then finally to me. For the first time, she saw not the quiet, predictable husband, but a stranger. Her lawyer opened the folder, his smug expression faltering as he read. "This is an invasion of privacy," he blustered, but the words lacked conviction. "It's a joint account," Marcus replied smoothly. "It's marital property, just like the nearly $15,000 in similar charges over the last 6 months. We have documented all of it." The room was silent. The mediator looked from the file to Clara, his expression unreadable. Clara's composure had cracked. She was staring at me, her eyes wide with a mixture of shock and fury. "You went through my things?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "I went through our finances," I corrected her, speaking for the first time. My voice was steady. "I found a discrepancy." The first session ended shortly after that. They were rattled. We had fired the first carefully aimed shot, and it had hit its mark. They had come in expecting a swift victory, and we had shown them we had ammunition they didn't know existed. The weeks that followed were a turning point. The external catalyst, the thing that would accelerate Clara's downfall, came not from me, but from the world she had tried to enter. News broke in the financial pages about Julian's development company. It was a house of cards. He had been financing his lavish lifestyle and risky projects with fraudulent loans and shady investors. The waterfront deal her mother had crowed about was collapsing. Lawsuits were being filed. Julian's assets were being frozen. I learned this from Marcus, who had been keeping a close watch. The shiny, promising life Clara had left me for was revealed to be a mirage. Julian, the great provider, was a con man on the verge of ruin. Suddenly, her divorce settlement wasn't just a bonus prize. It was her only lifeline. Her desperation became palpable. The legal letters became more frantic. They tried to rush a settlement, suddenly willing to negotiate, but their position was still based on the inflated value of my firm. They were trying to grab as much as they could before her new world imploded completely. Then came the call I had been half expecting. It was Clara. Her voice was completely different. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a thin, wavering panic. "Mark, can we talk?" she asked. We met at a quiet, neutral coffee shop. She looked tired. The designer clothes seemed to hang off her, a costume for a role she could no longer play. "Julian, it's all a mess," she began, tears welling in her eyes. "He lied to me. He lied to everyone." I just sipped my coffee, waiting. "I made a mistake, Mark," she said. her voice dropping to a desperate whisper. She reached across the table, trying to take my hand, but I moved it away. I was foolish. I was unhappy and I made a terrible mistake. We can fix this. I can come home. We can forget any of this ever happened. It was her last, desperate gambit. A plea for reconciliation. She wasn't asking for forgiveness because she loved me. She was retreating to the safest port in her personal storm. She saw me once again as a resource, her stable, reliable, boring fallback plan. I looked at her, the woman I had spent 12 years of my life with. I felt a flicker of something, not love, but a deep, melancholy pity for the person she had become. She had traded a life of substance for a cheap imitation, and now the imitation had shattered. "No, Clara," I said, my voice gentle but firm. "We can't. That house is no longer your home. You made your choice. The things that happened can't be forgotten." Her face crumpled. "But what am I supposed to do?" she cried. "He's going to lose everything. I'll have nothing." "You should have thought of that," I said, standing up from the table. "The mediation is next Tuesday. I'll see you there." I walked out of the coffee shop and didn't look back. The final act was about to begin. The final mediation was held in the same sterile conference room, but the atmosphere was entirely different. The arrogance on their side of the table was gone, replaced by a tense, grim silence. Clara looked haggard. Julian had officially filed for bankruptcy 2 days prior, and news of his indictment on fraud charges was all over the business section. Her better life had evaporated into scandal and ruin. Her lawyer started with a much chastened tone. He proposed a new settlement, one that was still far too high but was a shadow of their initial demand. They were bleeding and they knew it. Marcus let him finish. Then he leaned forward and placed a thick, bound document on the table. "Before we respond to that offer," he said calmly, "I believe there are a few things everyone needs to see." He began to speak, his voice a steady, methodical drumbeat of facts. He laid out the entirety of our case, not just the affair, but the calculated financial deception. He presented the complete credit card statements, the spreadsheet tracking her spending, the hotel receipts. Then he moved on. He produced a report from a private investigator we had hired, complete with dated photographs of Clara and Julian together, entering hotels at intimate dinners on his yacht. The dates on the photos corresponded perfectly with her cash withdrawals and credit card charges. Clara sank lower in her chair, her face pale. "This all demonstrates a clear pattern of dissipation of marital assets," Marcus stated. "But that's not our primary concern today. Our primary concern is the valuation of Markwell Designs." He slid another document across the table. "This is the official valuation of the firm, conducted by a neutral, court-appointed accountant." Her lawyer grabbed it, his eyes scanning the pages frantically. "As you can see," Marcus continued, "the firm's tangible assets and current year profits are modest. The number you've been working with is wildly speculative. However, that is also a secondary point." He paused, letting the weight of the moment settle in the room. This was it, the unveiling. "What your client failed to understand," Marcus said, looking directly at Clara, "is the structure of the business she was so eager to claim. 3 months ago, Markwell Designs was restructured. This was done for tax purposes and to position the company for future growth, a process that began long before the separation. The majority of the firm's value, its intellectual property, its goodwill, and its most significant assets, are held by a parent corporation, Emark Holdings." He produced the incorporation documents. Emark Holdings was funded exclusively with Mr. Markwell's premarital assets and capital that is legally defined as separate property. Your client's claim only extends to the marital portion of Markwell Designs, which, after the restructuring, amounts to a minority shareholding with a valuation of, he paused, looking down at the final page, approximately $85,000. Her 50% claim would be on that amount. A choked sound escaped Clara's lips. Her lawyer was staring at the documents, his face a mask of disbelief. He had been outmaneuvered at every turn. He had assumed he was dealing with a simple architect, not a strategic planner who had protected his life's work with the same precision he used to design a skyscraper's foundation. 85,000? Her lawyer stammered. That's impossible. It's corporate law, Marcus replied simply. And it's ironclad. The mediator, who had been reviewing the documents, finally spoke. He looked at Clara, his expression stern. Given the clear evidence of financial misconduct and the legal structuring of the business assets, the offer on the table is more than generous. In fact, Mr. Markwell would be well within his rights to sue for the return of the dissipated marital funds, which would likely exceed any potential settlement. The room fell into a stunned silence. The totality of her miscalculation finally landed on Clara. She had not been leaving a man for a richer one. She had been leaving the source of her entire lifestyle, which she had foolishly mistaken for a cage. She had blown up her own life for a fantasy, and in the process had forfeited any legitimate claim to the reality she abandoned. Her composure finally, completely shattered. It was not a quiet breakdown. It was a primal scream of rage and despair. "You did this!" she shrieked, pointing a trembling finger at me. "You planned this. You were spying on me. You set me up." I met her gaze for the last time across that table. The hurt was long gone, replaced by a vast, empty space. "No, Clara," I said, my voice quiet but carrying across the room. "You did this. You made a series of choices based on greed and deception. I just built a better foundation." The judgment was swift. The mediator accepted our settlement proposal. The house would be sold. After paying off the mortgage and our legal fees, we would split the remaining modest equity. She would receive a one-time, lump sum alimony payment that was a tiny fraction of what she had demanded. She would get nothing from my firm. Her mother, who had co-signed on several of Julian's fraudulent loans at Clara's urging, was also facing financial ruin. The enabler was going down with the ship. I stood up, nodded once to the mediator, and walked out of the room without looking back. I could hear her sobbing behind me, a raw, broken sound that was no longer my concern. I walked out of the building and into the bright afternoon sun, feeling the weight of the last year lift from my shoulders. I was free. 6 months later, I was standing on a muddy plot of land on the outskirts of the city. The air was crisp with the promise of autumn. In front of me, the steel skeleton of the new community library was rising against the sky. It was my design, my project, the biggest of my career. It was a structure built to last, a place for knowledge, for community, for quiet contemplation. It was a symbol of my new beginning. My phone buzzed. It was a message from Marcus, a picture of a check. It was the final payment from the sale of the house. The last tie was cut. I smiled, put the phone away, and turned my attention back to the rising structure. As I was walking back to my truck, I saw her. She was standing across the street, by a bus stop. I almost didn't recognize her. The designer clothes were gone, replaced by worn jeans and a faded coat. Her hair was unkempt. She was thin, and the vibrant energy she had always possessed was gone, replaced by a hollowed-out weariness. She was just another person waiting for a bus. Our eyes met across the street. A flicker of recognition, of shock, passed over her face. She took a half-step forward, her mouth opening as if to call my name, a desperate, pleading look in her eyes. It was the look of someone with nothing left to lose, about to beg for a handout from the life she had thrown away. I didn't get angry. I didn't feel a surge of triumph. I just felt a quiet finality. I held her gaze for a single, long moment, and then I gave a small, almost imperceptible shake of my head. I got into my truck, started the engine, and drove away, watching her shrink in my rearview mirror until she was gone. A life, like a building, must be constructed on a solid foundation. You can be seduced by flashy facades and ornamental additions, but if the groundwork is built on lies, on greed, on a lack of integrity, the entire structure is doomed to collapse. I built my life back, beam by beam, on the bedrock of truth and self-respect. And from that foundation, the view is clear and the future is sound.